Hans should be back next week. He was called out on to a meeting about Envision Utah, and I have with me as a guest today Ben McClintock, who is an expert on this. Anyway, he's as expert as I think you can find in the state of Utah. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Without you being here, we probably wouldn't have had a program because I didn't have time to get prepared for this. But I'm glad that you're here to do this.
Appreciate it.
And if anybody would like to call in with a question or comment, that is fine. I want to start out though with a statement by President Benson, and I love the prophets and I love their statements. And he made a statement at one time. He said, I testify that wickedness is rapidly expanding in every segment of our society. It is more highly organized, more cleverly disguised, and more powerfully promoted than ever before. Secret combinations lusting for power, gain, and glory are flourishing. A secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world. Well, what we're speaking about today is I think, part of that organization, and it's called Envision Utah. Now, I know a lot of people don't like those kind of statements, but I believe it is true, and it is cleverly disguised. In fact, when they come up with a keyword like high density living, they like to change it so that it's more palatable. They find these words that don't fit too well with what the public wants. And so they have changed that to compact housing. Now that's a little easier to swallow. Or smart growth is another one that people have been turned off about. And so they changed the wording to quality growth strategies. Now these are just really nice sounding words, but as President Benson talks about, that is cleverly disguised. And this Envision Utah is basically a program to take away your freedoms. And Ben, have I said anything wrong so far in your eyes?
I think you're right on.
Okay. So I know that you're quite into Envision Utah. Can you kind of explain to us how that's coming down to us and how it's affecting us?
Yeah, some background on it. Just first some background on me. I'm one of the co-founders of defendingutah.org. I hope all your listeners will go check out our website at defendingutah.org and check out some of the reports that we've done on some of the things that I'm going to be covering, because we've done some in-depth investigative reporting on subjects like Envision Utah and the things that are connected to it. And so if they can check out defendingutah.org, it'd be really good for them to be able to really get some more details, more documentation than we can really cover on a radio show.
Yeah, and if you want to get a pencil and paper, we'll be bringing that up again later so that we can make sure you get that.
Thank you. And I think you're exactly right, but with a little bit of a caveat. I don't think that they're that cleverly disguised anymore. Oh. If you go to if you kind of compare their propaganda with what they actually do, and even when you go to their websites, it's even more different than maybe even what you hear about them on the radio. When you start digging into it and looking at what they're saying, it's right out there in the open of what they're doing. It's pretty. They're getting more blatant every day.
Well, that only indicates to me then that they're starting to win their propaganda war, and we're falling for it, and so they become more emboldened. And I'm concerned about the Orem City Council. Everybody except for Hans, I think, is falling for this. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure but I think so, unless they tell me different. That's been their direction, is to accept this kind of stuff and just let it come into the city, and it's a total socialist idea.
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely so. It's if you go to their website and you understand what socialism is and you read what they're saying, it's clearly socialism. And what's you talked about how they're becoming more emboldened. They are and they aren't. They do have to keep it secret still, because if you hear their different radio ads, then it's kind of more mainstream and not so obvious what they're doing. But then if you actually click on their websites and you go through what they want you to do, then it becomes more and more obvious. Some background of what Envision Utah is: it's actually an implementation of soft law, meaning law that was passed that's not enforceable by the United Nations. The United Nations passed Agenda 21 and was signed by President George Herbert Walker Bush and President Clinton back in the 1990s. It was a big confab down in Rio de Janeiro back in the 1990s, and it would basically an overview, a real brief overview of what Agenda 21 is. It's an attack on the family and on property rights. They go through and they different buzzwords that you'll hear are smart growth, sustainability, things like that. And whenever you hear anything along those lines, just that's Agenda 21. You run. It's an attack. They talk about sustainability, but they don't say what sustainability is. But if you actually read on a little more detail of what they say sustainability is, the things that they've listed as unsustainable is driving cars, having an air conditioner, and eating meat. Those are all unsustainable. We can't. If they get their plan fully implemented, those things will be no more.
Yeah, that's kind of like probably the no burning coal or burning wood. They take it all out of our control to be able to sustain ourselves.
Yep. Yeah, it's all about taking away self-sufficiency as well. In addition to the property rights, it actually gets into family as well, where they get into their education programs of limited population and actually forced, getting a license like they do in China to have only one child. And if you want another child, you have to go to the government for permission. And that's all a part of their sustainability, because that if you've got too many children, that's not a sustainable lifestyle according to these individuals.
Yeah, which in my idea is having as many children as you can, because people are what creates wealth.
Right.
I mean, so, but and you mentioned that something about that it's coming down to us, and they don't say that they're going to force it on us, and so, but what they do is they get into the city councils and woo them into that direction, and then we kind of accept it. They say, well, we'll accept this stuff, and but the thing is, they cover it with lies and deceit.
Absolutely.
And then it becomes
and money.
And money. Yeah, and money.
They have lots of different organizations that they'll come to the cities and they'll offer them grants and promises and different monies to be able to pass the hard laws in the cities, because the UN, of course, can't just come in and that's why they call it, that's their own word, soft law. They pass these agreements and then they get the local communities to pass hard law locally, and so we can't blame the UN for these things. It eventually is our own responsibility for this, because it's our cities that are enforcing it.
So our mayor and our councils are deceived to accepting this with all the pretty words, and that's what socialism is clear full of, is pretty words.
Yeah.
To get people to sway to accept this kind of stuff, and we just and they fall for it hook, line, and sinker. And I don't understand why.
Because they just listen to the sound bites, the bumper sticker statements that you hear on the radio, and the bullying mixed with. I mean, if you don't go along with this, you're a denier, which is they're equating not going along with their program as the same as supporting the Holocaust. That's what that denier term is they're linking you to a Holocaust denier. And so it's this whole bullying you into supporting their agenda, mixed with lies, mixed with bribes. They come in and they say, okay, city, you do this, and if you do, we'll give you this much money for grants. And so the cities are like, hey, we're popular, we get money, what's not to love about this?
Now, does that money come down from the federal government then, or where does it come from?
It's a mixture of the federal, state, and grants.
And so they take the money from us and they bribe us with it.
Exactly.
That's what I thought.
And it's a mixture as well as like Ford Foundation type grants and Rockefeller Foundation, that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it's a mixture of and that's exactly the modern term of fascism is public-private partnership. Because if you go back to what Italy, fascist Italy as well as fascist Germany, it wasn't like communism where the state owned and controlled everything. The public still owned their businesses where the government controlled it. And so it was this merging of public and private enterprise to run business. And that's what, you go to Envision Utah's own website, that's what they say that they are, that they're a public-private partnership of government agencies as well as private individuals to be able to do this bait and switch of having public officials give it a public face, but at the same time, if they do anything unpopular, it's a private organization, so it's not these guys, and so the public officials aren't responsible for it. It's these private organizations that are responsible for it. So it's this total divide and conquer type mentality that's used.
And I've heard that statement in our own city council, public-private partnerships, and it just drives me crazy that they can't see what they're saying.
Yeah,
it's government control over private enterprise.
Exactly.
And it won't work.
Well, even if it does work, I don't want it to. I don't want the government telling me what to do with my business.
Well, yeah, that's true. But eventually it has to fail because the government doesn't care how they spend money.
Right.
I know I care about how I spend my money because I only have so much of it.
Right.
But they are always coming in and saying, we want more. We want more. And they
believe in a land of fairies and unicorns where money just grows on trees and they can just demand and demand and demand whatever they want.
Never end to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's never enough. Agenda 21, too, it's something that a lot of your listeners probably don't know. I mean, maybe not have heard about. I heard about it for the first time, I'm guessing about 13 years ago. A guy was running for governor, and on his signs he had this thing said, stop Agenda 21. And I was like, what is Agenda? The 21st agenda on what program? I mean, it was just kind of this weird thing that I never heard of, and it just didn't explain. And then all of a sudden, another night on the news, I was watching TV, and they came on with a program, a report on these individuals in Santa Cruz, California, who had their own private water wells that they had dug, and they had their wells, and they pumped water to their house and their land and that kind of stuff. And the representatives from the United Nations, because Santa Cruz had signed on to Agenda 21, given them authority to do this program, they were coming in and putting meters on these personally owned water wells.
They would have a hard time coming on my property and put a meter on it.
And so they was causing a big uproar, and they interviewed the people that were putting the meters on. And I'll never forget it because it just was a huge impact to me. Even though it was this long ago, the response was, well, Americans have given up their right to their water and their land because they've embraced gas-guzzling vehicles and urban sprawl, and somebody has to do something about it. And
anybody who would come up with that kind of a statement has got to be knotheads. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. Where do we give up our freedom when we sustain ourselves?
Right. So. Well, and what's funny is Doug Wright just today, I don't know, he's just such a big liberal. He just considers himself as a big Republican, but he's just a big liberal. And he was complaining because these rich people in California were digging their own water wells till they could have water. And as if that was such a horrible thing because they were self-sufficient. It was just insane. It blows my mind.
We want to make sure we don't die because we don't have water, so let's dig a well, but that's improper.
Right. Because it didn't depend on the government.
See, that's right. That's the insensibility of this whole thing. I mean, they don't think that we should have the ability to sustain ourselves and to live a life in a free America. They want to say, no, we're a community, and if one dies, we all die.
Right.
So,
and that's going on right here in Utah with Envision Utah, and whether they know it or not, and whether they call it Agenda 21 or not, because they know Agenda 21's been exposed, and so by their own admission, they say whenever we get exposed, we need to change our name. But
Right.
It's going on right here in Utah. In fact, a part of Agenda 21 is to push people into the cities, and so you see the programs that are developing, such as this mass transit, trying to push everybody in the cities with these developments where they've got the malls and the housing, everything all put together. They're trying to push everybody into the cities, and that's a part of the Agenda 21 plan. And in fact, I've got some friends that own some land in rural Utah County, and they've got 80 acres, and they want to have just a couple houses on this. 80 acres just seems got some room to put some houses on.
Yeah.
Not to make a big suburbanite out of it, but just to have some guys be able to live together and live off the land. And the zoning didn't allow for it.
Yeah, so there the zoning is probably one house per 80 acres.
One per 50.
One per 50, yeah.
And so they go and they try to get that, try to find out how they can get the zoning changed to be able to allow a couple houses on this thing. And they go and the guy says, well, what we're trying to do, this is one of the staffers at the planning department in Utah County. And he says, well, the county plan is to get everybody into the cities. And that's why they don't allow. And that's one of the reasons why they don't allow more than. And so
they admit it.
They admit it, flat out. And then I went to the planning commission, Utah Planning Commission, a few months ago, and one of the I can't remember his name. I should have written it down, but one of the planning commission members said that property rights come from zoning. So and as opposed,
no, wait a minute. Now, where's this stated at?
I was at a planning commission meeting, and one of the board members said this at the meeting. They said, instead of this understanding that most people get that your rights come from God, not from government. That's one of the things that Ezra Taft Benson that you quoted earlier said.
Right.
Because if your rights, he said, either your rights come from God or they come from government. And if they come from government, that means they can come and go as they please. But if they come from God, the government's job is to protect those rights. But no, he said that your property rights come from zoning.
Yeah, well, so that's a great indication of why we need to, as people listening to us, we need to get riled up somehow and go after these people and say, that is not right, stay off my property.
Yeah.
And so, and they seem to government just seems to encroach upon property, that property is wealth. And that's part of taking that away from us so that we can live as serfs.
Yeah.
And so we need to bow our back and tell the county, get off our property, and to city. I mean, if you was to build even a little tiny shack on your house, you'd need permission. If I'm to work on my own house to remodel it, I need permission.
Yep.
Now, where does all that come from? And we're allowing it to happen.
Can you imagine if the pioneers had to deal with what we had to deal with when they came into the valley to build their house?
None
of those log cabins would have been allowed to be built because they didn't have indoor plumbing and they didn't have this and they didn't have that. And
they had dirt floors.
Right, totally illegal.
Yeah.
So, we would have died if we had to deal with the stuff that we deal with now.
And this idea of bringing everybody from the county into the cities. There was a study I remember a long time ago. They did that with some rats. They had a colony of rats, and they had a certain area, and they only had a few in there, and they were able to live with each other. But as they increased how many rats were in that community, they started to fight and battle with each other, and it became disorganized. And I don't see that humans are much different. If you cram a whole bunch of us all together, pretty soon you have traffic problems and you're honking your horn. I mean, it just goes that way.
It increases violence,
and Joseph Smith said that he wanted maybe like 2,500 into each community. Then you start another community or something to that effect.
Right.
But where we got about 90,000 people here in Orem now.
Well, and it's not just Orem, because now the city's, you don't know where Orem starts and Provo begins.
That's all one big community.
It's from Provo to Bountiful is just one big town.
Yeah, I remember driving from Orem to Provo, and there's a little bit of where there wasn't much development, and each town was off by itself, kind
Right.
of. But
Yeah.
we've all grown together in Utah County.
And that's getting so Envision Utah. Well, maybe since we've gone maybe about halfway into the show, I'll mention to anybody that hasn't that just maybe joined on to defendingutah.org is our website, and some of the things that we've talked about with Agenda 21 here in Utah are gone into more detail, and more of the documentation is given on the website defendingutah.org, and I hope your listeners will check that out.
Yeah, so what are some of the signs that we might notice in reading the newspaper or listening to the radio? Some of the signs that would indicate to us that Envision Utah is kind of creeping up on us and taking over a little bit, and what it does to us, and what are some of the signs that we can see it coming?
Yeah. Envision Utah and one of their sister organizations called UCARE. You've probably seen some of their billboards around. The letter UCAIR, UCARE. And Envision Utah, they're sister organizations, and they're piggyback on each other. And they're, again, you've got the governor who's on their board, and you've got the former governor, John Huntsman Jr., who was actually also a part of a lot of different organizations, like I'm trying to build up with the Atlantic Council.
Yeah, I've been suspicious about our governor anyway.
Yeah, and the Atlantic Council is actually the leaders have actually called publicly. Brent Scrowcroft spoke at BYU calling for the New World Order and encouraging the students to serve the New World Order. And John Huntsman's a part of that organization, and he's linked to this Agenda 21 groups, the Envision Utah. And then now our Governor Herbert is also a part of that. And a lot of these organizations are linked to each other because what they do, it's a strategy to make it look like it's popular. You have this small group of people create 10 different organizations and make it look like they've got all this support because, oh, wow, we've got all of these different organizations supporting the same thing. But if you look at the leadership, it's all this incestual grouping going on where it's all just one person, basically, just a small group of people supporting one thing, where they make it look like it's popular by having all of these fake groups.
Yeah, that reminds me of a group that in the past have attacked a certain Christian organization or company, and they make it look like they get thousands of emails, complaining about it, and it's really the concoction that's only one person did.
Right.
And so it affects these companies. And we need to learn not to be affected by them.
Yeah, you go by principle as opposed to popular personalities.
Yeah.
So if you listen to maybe the more the bigger radio stations in the area, you hear a lot of ads, and they're like almost public service announcements. What they've done is they've given them discounts to be able to run a lot of ads, and Envision Utah has a lot of these ads. The same with UCARE. There was a billboard, and this is something you can it's a sign that you can tell that Agenda 21 is being implemented in your area. Is different buzzwords, like I said. You've got sustainability, smart growth, those types of things. One of their big programs this last year that a lot of us were able to work to stop was their ban on wood-burning stoves.
Yes, and I'm glad that we was able to do that.
And they put out this propaganda that was just so ridiculous. I've got a picture here. I took a picture of one of the billboards that says, "A wood-burning fireplace pollutes more than every car you see." So an inference there is that one person out there keeping their house warm, self-sufficient wise, not depending on the natural gas or the electric company, but burning their own wood that they've chopped down or collected themselves, is going to be a bigger polluter than every car. Your one fireplace, according to them, is a bigger polluter than every car you can see on the highway.
Uh-huh.
Anybody that believes that, I've got a bridge to sell you. I mean, because they always these environmentalists, that's their religion, and so they say that you're a denier if you don't go along with whatever they say. But they call you anti-science. But what's funny is they're the anti-science ones, because every report that's come out is that wood-burning stoves cause less than 2% of the pollution that we have in this inversion area. And in fact, this inversion that we had, is you saw from the storm that we just had this week, it's because we live in a bowl. no matter what we did, the Indians had the inversion. It's got nothing to do with our cars.
They just keep changing the idea of why it's dirty so they can drive the agenda.
Exactly.
It used to be the steel plant,
right,
here in Utah County, as in Orem. But now the steel plant's gone. We still have it,
right,
and the Indians had it. It is not a condition of the way we live. It's a condition of an inversion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called the environment.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And so they use these lies to be able to get you to feel guilty or feel pressured, saying that they build fear to get you to go along with their agenda. They need fear to be able to take away your liberty. You won't give away your liberty if you're not afraid of something.
Yeah, and that really has perplexed me lately, because I know the founding fathers, they weren't afraid and of what they had to do,
right,
and they did it. And yet we worry about terrorists coming to the point where we have an organization, the TSA, that will actually grope you to see if you're carrying a bomb.
right,
and that is fear. That where's our courage?
Yeah.
We should have the state legislature just kick TSA out of the state.
Yep.
And even if they threaten us with a no-fly zone, I mean, where are we going to have the courage to go forward and stand up for our rights? I
Exactly.
mean, they just run over us, and we just capitulate.
Yep. It's all based on fear, and they did that to a lot of states. That, for an example, they use these fear tactics to get you to go along with their program. There was a lot of states back in the 2007, 2008 that were nullifying the real ID, the national ID card that was going on. And what they would do to get when it was being debated in the state legislatures, the feds would come in and say, well, if you guys don't go along with this, your citizens won't be allowed to go on airplanes, they won't be allowed to go on trains, they won't be able to go visit their congressmen, they won't be able to go to federal buildings. And then 21 states passed nullification of the real ID, and guess what happened? Nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of like the two children that were taken into custody because they were playing in the playground.
Right.
And they build on these fears. I mean, is crazy.
It's totally crazy.
They want everybody to stay in their house around their parents, and no one become independent.
Yeah.
And so we have this fear-mongering, just like you've mentioned, and it's all over our society.
Yeah.
We need to have the courage to just say, finally, no, get out of our lives.
Yeah. And the fear-mongering with the TSA that they've used to bring in the TSA, now, there was just a report that KSL reported on yesterday about there was a group of homosexuals that were planning in a lot of the airports to pick people aside on purpose, to grope them on purpose.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is the result of giving into fear, as opposed to just standing on principle and doing the right thing.
Yeah, if everybody, and of course you're not going to see it because we're not united, if everybody say, okay, we're not going to the airport anymore until after that TSA is kicked out, and everybody would just be in unison on that, things would happen. We would get rid of them, because if we're not afraid, then they're losing money.
The sheriff should go down to the airport right now and arrest every single one of them, and not allow anybody to go in the airport until these guys, until the freedom's been restored to the airports.
Which they have power to do.
Yes, they do.
But I'm afraid the Salt Lake sheriff is in with them.
Well, he's not even the sheriff anymore. He's removed himself from the Utah Sheriff's Association.
Okay.
And because he's the chief executive officer of the Unified Police, which is a private police organization. We basically have a private mercenary group policing the streets of Salt Lake County now instead of a sheriff.
No, I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
We're working on a report at that at defendingutah.org. It'll be out soon. And so but going back to Envision Utah and how they're implementing Agenda 21 here in Utah, they use this propaganda and fear. They're saying if you are burning wood in your house, you are causing small children to die because of their asthma. You're causing old people to die because of their asthma. This guilt and fear to get you to go along with their agenda.
And the fact is, if we didn't have the wood-burning stove, these people would still die because of these things, because it's a health problem, not a wood-burning problem.
Or because they were cold because they couldn't burn wood in their house.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people that burn wood are people that are lower income, and maybe some older people as well. And so because if they're not allowed to burn wood and they can't afford to buy the gas, then they just freeze. It happens.
Yeah, you get sick.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so they mixed fear, and then they use propaganda. They use this false popular support. And you'll hear a lot of times on the radio these commercials to go to Envision Utah and take part in their survey. They need 50,000 Utahns to help shape Utah's future. And they're saying, you're going to have a voice in this. And so making youth believe that you're going to be able to have your voice involved in helping to guide this program. But the result is already predetermined. Once you go to the website, you'll see it lets you go through the different options, and then it lets you see before you supposedly vote, and to see what the result they say would happen from your choice. And so, you're like, oh man, I was wrong. I don't like the result from this. Yeah. I better go along with what they say because that's a much better result. And they use this propaganda like, okay, one of the choices you can make, they give them different names like the quaking aspen or the allosaurus or the seagull, and the seagull lily and the Bonneville trout. These are the different, they've given these different options. And the dinosaur, the allosaurus option, implying extinction, right?
Yeah.
is we don't implement strategies to achieve a vision of the future. Individuals, businesses, cities, and counties and other groups work separately to further their own interests, and that will lead to extinction, right? And so if I believe in property rights and not creating a regional government, if I believe in individual, state, and city and county sovereignty, then I am going to be extinct. Oh, I don't want to be extinct. I better agree to creating a regional government that implements Agenda 21 in Utah.
Yeah.
Because that's and so they and then you choose the predetermined outcome of what they think is best, and then then afterwards they say they come up with this report that says, almost unanimously, 50,000 Utahns agreed that we need to do something about this, and we need to have central planners tell you what to do with your property.
And it's manipulated questions, manipulated answers. I remember receiving a questionnaire in the mail at one time, and I like those kind because they give me choices, but I would write in between the lines my answer because I had my own idea. And of course, they won't do this on what these little things that you say that they're doing because they won't say what's your option and let you make a decision. They give you the options and then tell you the outcome.
Yeah. So. And so so they build this false public support based on their propaganda. And it's also what's used is a pincer strategy. So you've got UCARE and you've got Envision Utah that have this, they're kind of the most conservative, most Republicans, I would say, your grassroots Republicans, recognize them for what they are and might not support what they're doing right off the bat. You've got the kind of the more checker pants or what you call Rockefeller Republicans, more liberal Republicans that are supporting this kind of a thing. And then your more grassroots Republicans, they're like, they see through it and they like their property rights and they oppose what they're doing. And so they create a pincer strategy. You've got on one side, you've got the top from above, the government, and UCARE and Envision Utah doing this, and then you've got pressure from beneath, and then all of a sudden, and what the beneath pressure is kind of more people that you think are your friends, the wolves in sheep's clothing. The wolves are less dangerous because you know that they're wolves. It's the wolves in sheep's clothing that give you that are the real danger for you, and how that's being done in Utah is through the Lands Transfer Act. And this has been in the news a lot lately. And with my opposition to the Lands Transfer Act, don't get the wrong idea, I am totally in favor of taking our lands back.
Right.
We need our lands back. But the Transfer of Public Lands Act is a fraud. It's a Trojan horse to bring in Agenda 21 as the other part of the pincer strategy because that way they can get both the left and the right trying to work on programs to bring in Agenda 21 into Utah. And if you actually read the bill, it's the lawsuit against the federal government has been in the news a lot lately. So I'll cover that aspect first.
Okay.
They're suing the feds to get our land back. Ken Ivory and the American Lands Council are the major pushers of this Lands Transfer Act and the lawsuit to the federal government to get to supposedly get our lands back. That's the hook that they're using. But the lawsuit's a complete fraud to take money away from taxpayers and also to raise money for this organization to line their pockets. Because according to Article 3 of the Utah State Constitution, we've given the federal government our land in perpetuity. We gave it up willingly. And so that was our choice. And what the American Lands Council and Ken Ivory does is they use these they compare apples to oranges. They say, well, look at North Dakota, for example, is one of their favorite things to compare Utah's Enabling Act to North Dakota's Enabling Act, and they're exactly the same. That's true. But our Enabling Act, the portion in Article 3 of our Constitution, became part of our Constitution, where North Dakota's Enabling Act didn't become part of their Constitution. And so they do this bait and switch where they say, oh, they're the same. Well, they're not, because our Constitution says that we give them our land in perpetuity, where North Dakota doesn't.
Uh-huh.
And so this lawsuit they know will lose in court because of Article 3 of our state constitution. It's against our state constitution. So first of all, to be able to win any lawsuit, we have to, which I support fully, get rid of Article 3 of Utah state constitution. We need an amendment to repeal that.
And when did that Article 3 first been introduced? Is that when
it was part of
it was founding?
It was when it's founding because it was part of the state's Enabling Act.
Which means the federal government had that put in, because I know that to be able to become a state, the federal government put all kinds of
requirements on the state,
to become a state, and that's probably one of them.
Yes.
And that was unconstitutional in its face.
Right.
Because the Constitution should have been developed by the state legislature, not being enforced by what the federal government wanted.
Right. At the time, though, the federal government had imposed its own governor,
right,
deposed our own. The governor came in and got rid of over 200 elected officials, state legislators, just threw them out of office, and imposed his own non-Mormons into those offices. And so it was just the feds were just crazy oppressive, and I don't think they've given up any.
And so
Article 3 is just, it needs to be repealed if we're going to get our lands back. If any lawsuit's going to go anywhere, and they know that.
So this Envision Utah idea of getting our lands back.
Well, that's not Envision Utah. This is American Lands Council. That's they're the pincer strategy of getting the other part of Vision 21 into the state.
Okay, so at that process, then what they're doing is taking the old process where the federal government controlled it and giving that control still to other than the people of the state.
Well, that's right. Well, it would lose that. First of all, that lawsuit would lose, and so the other part of it, though, is in the bill itself. It does several things. To be able, it proposes different things to be able to start the transfer. Once we get our land back, how do we do it? And so it's not going to be through a court process. We'll lose the court battle. What will happen is Congress, if this goes through, Congress will actually just give us the land because of the rest of the bill. I believe that the bill is written so that we don't. The lawsuit is there to raise money and as a money raiser and a way to spend money as well. And so what we need, and so that's just a side issue. But the major issue is Congress probably will grant us the land back as a part of this because the bill does a few things. What it does is it actually doesn't give the land back to Utah. And so saying we're going to get our lands back is a fraud. The Utah Transfer of Public Lands Act is a fraud because it doesn't give Utah its lands back. What it does is it creates a regional government of the western states to manage the land.
Oh, brother.
And so you've got California, Oregon, Colorado, except the western states, all saying, okay, once in the bill, this is in the bill, says once, so we agree together, and whatever, and only what we all agree to is binding on all the states. And so what the only things that California and Oregon are going to agree to aren't things that Utahns aren't going to like. And so it's you've got California and Oregon and Washington and Colorado and New Mexico, much more liberal states, basically telling us what to do. Instead of Washington, D.C. controlling our lands, we've got liberals in California that don't even know how to run their own state telling us what to do with our lands.
A regional government.
Regional government. And other parts of it as well is they say, oh, we need to increase funding for, it's a long name. It's a McAllister. I'm just looking up the bill right now. It's the...
It's as part of the...
it's the Luray McAllister Critical Land Conservation Fund.
Oh, okay.
And what this bill does, as a part of supposedly transferring our lands back, is it increases funding for this Agenda 21 linked group.
Okay. Well.
So giving money to this Agenda 21 organization is supposed to help us get our lands back. That doesn't make any sense. Another thing that the Lands Transfer Act bill does is it actually sets apart land to be totally off limits to humans, and so it's again doing that whole the wilderness area. And in fact, Bliss 2 of the John Birch Society brought that up to Mrs. Ivory on a YouTube video that they have about wilderness areas, and she admitted it. She says, yes, this bill has wilderness areas, but we had to do it because it would never pass without it. And so they admit that this is part of the deal, is get these wilderness areas that are something that we promised to do when we signed on to Agenda 21, is a part of the Lands Transfer Act. And so there's this huge swaths of land that are completely off limits, and then we give, according to the bill, the management of these lands are given to private environmentalist, radical environmentalist groups.
Yeah, and if anybody in the public has never ever seen one of those maps that shows the United States all colored in red,
right?
Those are the environmental areas that the forested areas that we can't go, and that practically covers everything we got.
Yeah, exactly. There's huge areas, and what it does is, again, because these huge swaths of land are put off limits to human use, and then on that same map that you're referencing has some yellow areas, which is limited human use, and then they've got, which is what they've pushed everybody to these cities. And that's exactly because they're trying to push everybody into the cities to control them, because you can't get your own water, you can't be dependent on food, you can't grow your own gardens. You push everybody in, you can control where they travel, you can control what they do, and they're dependent completely on your local governments for their basic sustenance, because you can't provide for yourself through gardens and digging wells and that kind of stuff.
That's right. So what you explained, I think there was someone else that had that plan before we came to this earth. and it's a great idea for control, and that's what he wants, is control. And so we need to try and break this idea that we want government to take care of us. And in fact, this map with that shows all the red on the United States, they'll have little spots in between a lot of these places that are white, but it's all covered around with red. How can you ever get out of those areas? I mean, so they're actually controlling everything in the United States.
Right.
Because they don't want you to even travel, and they don't want you moving a rock. They don't want you pulling a weed. I mean, these guys are crazy.
And and this seems like a far out idea, but it's not. It's being implemented in Utah and in the other places in the United States. I was in Washington State for a little while, and King County, for those of you that might not be aware of the area, King County is where Seattle is. Seattle's like the big city in King County, but King County also, kind of like Salt Lake County, has some rural areas. And what the county commission, they passed a bill, what was referenced in local media, called the 1492 statute, where it didn't apply to the city of of Seattle, but it applied to the rural areas, where you had to return 60% of your land to 1492 status, pre-Columbus status, where you weren't allowed to mow your lawn, you weren't allowed to do trees, you had to just leave it completely alone, 60% of your property, based on this Agenda 21 program. And so this isn't some far out thing in the future. This is stuff that's happening right now.
Yeah, and those people that suggest that we do that they're not in the real world. I mean, I actually think they have a mental disorder, because that is crazy to try to think that we're going to do that. I mean, land, and the Founding Fathers understood this, land is wealth.
Yeah.
And if you got control of the land, you have the wealth. And so they're taking that control away from us, so we don't have the wealth.
Land is as wealth as well as liberty.
Yeah, wealth and liberty.
Because if you don't have the ability, if you're dependent on somebody else for your sustenance, you're a slave to them.
That's right. And that's where we're getting ourselves in America. In fact, just the whole idea. In fact, I see all these apartments going up in Orem.
Yeah.
I mean, where are all these people going to come from? The only thing I can think of is they're going to force them out of the county somehow into these apartments. And well, through
zoning, they make it impossible for people to be able to have the land, and they've got to move in, and they increase gas prices, so it costs too much for you to drive, for you to commute from the country to the cities for jobs.
And these aren't necessarily only our elected officials; these are bureaucrats, unelected people that do this. But our elected people are at fault, and we should kick them out because they're the ones that accept that.
Right.
I mean, they pass these little rules, and they fall for it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, but I've been asked by some to not do it. But but the idea that the state does not accept the city manager type of government anymore.
Right.
And so we in Orem have that program, city manager.
City manager.
So
most cities do, yeah.
Yeah, so no one is responsible for anything, because you go to the city manager and he says, well, I don't vote. You have to go to the city council. Then you go to the city council and say, what about this? It's, we don't do all the planning and figuring, and someone does that full time and knows what's going on. And so they're pointing at each other, and we lose control. I think we need to go back to a mayor council.
Oh,
government.
totally. Yes. The city manager is an unelected official that has all the power, because he's there from administration to administration, and he's the one that does the day-to-day operations of what we all feel every day.
And so we fall for it.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that what we have in Orem City is more of a socialist type of a government than a responsible mayor council government who are supposed to run it. And now we know who to point our finger at.
Right.
But go ahead. I digress.
No, that's great. It's part of the whole thing, and so we see from that this isn't some far off thing. Some people think, that would never happen here. That's so radical that these things of pushing people into the cities and taking away their land and whatnot, that would never happen here. Well, it's happening here, and it's happening now. I was at that same planning commission that I was at, where one of the commissioners said that your property rights come from zoning. They had a farmer come in, and they wanted to take away his land for possible future use.
Yeah, they come up with all kinds of stuff.
They didn't even have a plan for it. They said we might want that in the future, so we're going to take it.
Yeah, and that's I don't know how these people get so emboldened to understand that we have property rights, and they have almost total control of our property as it is, and we don't bow our back.
Right.
I mean, if I'm going to remodel my house, I have to get permission.
Yeah.
I mean, who? Because they say, well, we got to make sure it's done right. Well, the other guy that's going to buy that house, he can look at it, and we got private companies to tell people whether those houses are right. We don't need government involved.
Right.
In fact, that's the worst way to take care of it, is get government involved.
Because they act like the government loves you more than you do,
and they don't.
I mean, come on, give me a break.
Yeah.
And somebody brought up the point, all these regulations. They said, well, pretty soon I'm going to need permission to go to the bathroom, and you know what? You do, because it's actually you're not. It's illegal to build a house without a bathroom, and it's illegal to build a bathroom without a permit, and it's illegal to go to the bathroom outside, and so you actually do have to have a permit to go to the bathroom.
And we are so controlled. A lot of people think we're the freest nation on earth, and I think we are,
but that's not saying
because
much.
of the Constitution. But we don't claim it,
right?
And we're losing all kinds of freedoms, and we are becoming slaves, because we're not awake to what's happening.
Yeah. And so something to take away is Hans is not here today because he's with the city council at an Envision Utah meeting. Envision Utah's goal is to implement Agenda 21 in Utah. Envision Utah's goal is to push everybody into the cities to take away property rights and to create regional government. That's their goal. You look at their website, they don't come out and say, I want a regional government, but you look at what the words mean that they're using. It's regional government that are building. They're taking away your property rights. It's leading us towards the China one-child policy and also China's government control of property policies.
Yeah,
that's what they're bringing in.
And I would suggest to everybody that's listening to us today to let their neighbors know about this radio show, to listen to what's going on, and to contact your mayor or your city manager and say, stop doing this.
Yeah.
Leave us alone. Let us live our life the way we want to, and unless we hurt somebody, leave us alone.
Yeah, and don't fall for the false solutions. Know what they're really doing. Utah County is a part of the American Lands Council, which is the group that's pushing this Agenda 21 being forced upon us here in Utah. A lot of the counties across the state and across the West are becoming a part of this. They're paying anywhere between $500,000 to $75,000 a year to be a part of the American Lands Council, which is pushing Agenda 21 in Utah. And Utah County is one of them. And so you need to let the county commissioners know you don't want your money going to the American Lands Council.
We're paying for our own enslavement.
We are.
And so what we need to do is try and push our county to say, get out of this program.
Yeah.
To get away from it.
Exactly.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. What you got more for us before we end?
So if you go to defendingutah.org, we've got several articles on Agenda 21 being implemented in Utah. There's one called the Utah Lands Transfer. Part 1 is it a scam? And then you got Part 2, the scam's official, where Shahzad Qureshi, one of our investigative reporters and co-founders, actually goes through. There was a bill, SJR 11, back in, I think it was 2013. SJR 11 in 2013 said that the state of Utah was opposed to the United Nations Agenda 21. Utah was officially on record being opposed to Agenda 21. That's wonderful. And as a part of it, they give specific things to look out for and words to look out for. And it says that we reject the United Nations Agenda 21 both in its intent and potential for abuse. Urges Utah state agencies and political subdivisions to not adopt or implement policy recommendations that deliberately or inadvertently infringe or restrict private property rights without the due process. And so right there, we're on record of being opposed to it, but then we go on the other side, and our counties are going directly against this bill that was passed and in implementing these programs. It also says that it urges state agencies and political subdivisions to not adopt or develop environmental and developmental policies that without due process would infringe on or restrict private property rights or property owners. Agenda 21 strategies for sustainable development. And so the state is on record as recognizing the phrase sustainable development as an Agenda 21 phrase. And that whenever you hear that phrase, anybody's trying to do something sustainable development and future planning, those types of things are all Agenda 21 words on record as being recognized by the state of Utah. And that they urge the state and local governments across the United States to not enter into any agreement, expend any sum of money, contract services, or give financial aid to those in non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations affiliated with Agenda 21. Well, you know what? Utah County is in violation of SJR 11 because they're members of the American Lands Council. They need to get out of that Agenda 21 agreement and stop paying money every year to this organization. It's against this resolution passed by the state legislature.
Yeah, and it is so incumbent upon us that we bow our back as a citizenry, because we're watching our own enslavement and our own demise, and we're not really speaking out much against it. We need to get a hold of our city councils, and we need to get a hold of our county councils and change this. And if we don't do it in mass, we're only burying ourselves.
Yeah. And getting back to another tactic, the tactic that they use of fear. I noticed at the county council meeting, at the planning commission meeting, that they pit you. They have an open forum to be able to.
1 minute.
Okay. To be able to comment. Like somebody comes in and says they want this done to be able to protect their property rights, and then you can comment on it. But if you're there because you want something from the county, you don't want to go against what they're saying to this other guy, and so you won't stand up for him because you want to get on their good side to be able to get what you want. And so they use this zoning to be able to pit each other against each other. And so I really hope that your listeners will go to defendingutah.org, check out the documentation. Don't just take my word for it. Look at the bills, look at the wording, and look at the documentation. We link directly to the state website, and you can find out for yourself exactly what we're talking about.
Right. Well, our time is up. We need the public to have the rugged individuality that we had at the founding of this country, not fear, but the price of freedom is anything we can give to it, and we need to start doing it now. So thank you for coming, Ben. I appreciate you being here very much.
Appreciate it.
And we'll see you another time, hopefully.